Hello and welcome to GryphonArt. This week I am going to stick with the A5 Milk Carton template in order to show you how, using that template as your base, you can create a substantially larger gift box. This is a series of videos and I have already shared with you 4 variations on the A5 Milk Carton template, so 5 boxes including the original carton. So this is the 6th box and the largest gift box to date. Now, if you've been watching any of those other videos, you will already know that I do always show you the relationship between the original milk carton and the variation. So this is the size milk carton that you would normally create if you used that template in the standard way. So you'd end up with a box that has a base that's 2 inches square and a main body height of 2 3/4 inches. So if we now compare that with this tall triple width milk carton, I hope you can see, unfortunately I'm limited with camera space here, but I think you can make out we've still got the 2-inch depth to the box. That remains the same, but we have a carton that is 3 times the width and over twice the height, so a much larger box. So I'm just going to set those aside for a second. Now, what I've recently realized is that although I have always shown you the relationship between the original A5 milk carton and the variation that we happen to be working with on the day, I've never really explained why I've grouped all these gift boxes under the A5 category and the benefits there are in doing that. Now, because I think that an understanding of that thought process is really very helpful, I'm just going to quickly go through that with you now. Right, so by having a series of boxes that are based on a single template, so in this case the A5 milk carton template, you're more readily able to remember where the score lines are. And what that means is that you are also more readily able to create a box of a certain size without even referring to a template. In order to illustrate that, I just want to show you some of the other variations in this range so that you can see the very strong common elements that are associated with this range. So let's first of all, if we look at the double width milk carton, the roof is the same, it's still a 2-inch depth. The triple width, it's the same height, same depth. So again, that's common. So in both of those cases, those boxes have been grown sideways, and all that's happening there is that you're making a decision to omit some of the score lines. So you're still using the 2-inch marks that come with the original template. So you just know you've got to score at 2 inches, and then you're omitting the 4 and 6 inches and scoring at the 8-inch. So you're just making that decision on the fly depending on what size box you want to end up with. All of the boxes, no matter what the height, so this double height one here, this tall one, still has this same top section. So no matter what box you're making in this range, you are going to be scoring at 3/8 of an inch and 1 7/8 of an inch. The only additional score line we have is with these taller boxes because you're moving the baseline to grow it upwards. So instead of scoring at 4 5/8 of an inch as you would for all the boxes that grow sideways, you're scoring at 10 1/4 inches. So I hope that helps you to see that relationship and understand more what this range of boxes is about and how you can more readily remember where to score in order to build a particular size box. Right, I'm glad that's sorted, so we can now get on with our project. So ordinarily with our A5 milk carton, we would be starting with a piece of A5 card, basically half the size of a piece of A4. So because we want to grow our box upwards, I'm going to replace that A5 card with a piece of A4, so twice the length, but I'm still going to score in the same way. So the first score line for our A5 milk carton is at 2 inches, and that's where I'm going to score first. So 2 inches. Make sure that's in place. Now, because I want to grow that box sideways as well, I'm going to omit to score at 4 inches and 6 inches, and I'm just going to score at 8 inches. And that's going all the way down the length of that card. So now, as I would for the A5 carton, I'm going to turn that card anti-clockwise, and I'm going to score at 3/8 of an inch for the very top section, and 1 7/8 of an inch. So we always score, for all the boxes in this range, we always create those particular score lines. Now, for the A5 carton, I would score at 4 5/8 of an inch, but because I want a much taller box, I'm moving that score line, my baseline in effect, to 10 1/4 inches. Now I'm going to rotate my card clockwise for the last score that I create using the scoreboard. And that's just this little tiny top one at the 1 inch mark for my side panel. And that just extends to that first 3/8 of an inch mark. Now the next set of score lines I find easier to do on my self-heal mat. So I'm just going to go ahead and put those in quickly now. So these are just those diagonals for the very end panel. Sometimes, especially if you've used a self-heal mat for all your scoring, you won't be able to see these on the right side of your card, so you might need to fold and score your card first. So that's all the scoring finished now for that particular piece of card. So the next part of the process is to quickly fold and score along all those score lines that we've just created. So I'm just going to very quickly do that next. And if you haven't seen my other videos with regard to the milk cartons, then I should perhaps just point out that I do find it's best not to use the edges of your card when you come to do this task. You want to make sure that your fold lines or crease lines on one side of the card line up with the fold lines on the other, because the card isn't always square. And if you go to the edges of your card, you may find that when you come to put your box together, your score lines don't line up. Especially when, as is the case with this box, you're going to be using 2 pieces of card. So how are we doing? I think we've got them all now. Yeah, so it's just these little ones in the top corner. And when you've got this size box, it's relatively easy to put these diagonal lines in place. But as a general rule of thumb, if you can get them to a point where you can pinch them, she says, and then get a flat edge, you can generally put the fold line flat on a board or a flat surface, and you can use your bone folder to apply the necessary pressure. So there we are. So that is actually all the folds and scores in place for that box. But we do need to have two pieces of card exactly the same, folded in exactly the same way. So I'm going to do that off camera so that it's not wasting any more of your time, and then I'll come back to you once I've got to that point. Right, so I now have my two pieces of card exactly the same. They've been scored and folded in exactly the same way. So if I just show you, they sit together absolutely on top of each other. So you do need to duplicate them. You don't need opposite sides or anything like that. Now, the next thing that we need to do, having got those two pieces of card, is to join them together to make one long length of card, which will form the total circumference of our box. Now, if you've been watching any of my other videos, you'll know that I always like to do a dry run to make sure that everything's lining up at this stage, because you can make slight adjustments if things are not quite right. It just gives you that opportunity if you do a dry run. But I'm happy that all my fold lines are in line, so I can just remove the backing. Actually, I've got that the wrong way around. The backing from my double-sided tape, and we can go ahead and join those two pieces of card. Now, again, I normally just concern myself with the main body of the box first. So from here to here, because if you can get those lined up, the rest should actually automatically line up, as is the case here. So at this point, our box is actually ready for assembly. But because we've got these quite flat embellishments that we need to apply to our box, I'm going to do that prior to assembly, because it's much more easy to put these on the box when you've got a flat surface to apply pressure on. So I'm going to do as many of the embellishments as I can next, prior to assembly. So the first thing I'm going to be dealing with is this embellishment here, actually, which will be going on the front of my box, and that comes from Spellbinders. It's one of these flat metal die cuts. It's from the Spellbinders Nestabilities range, and it's the Decorative Curved Square number S4-525, but I will be putting information in the description area for this video so that you can find all the detail later if you need it. So I've just chosen one of these front panels as the front of my box because I'm only embellishing one side of the box. I'm just trying to get it all in the camera for you, so that you can more readily see what I'm doing. So that's going to be positioned somewhere around here. Now the problem that I have with these odd shapes is lining them up by trying to get them square, and I do like to do the best that I can in that respect. So if you've got a very good eye, as I've said before, you know, just make full use of it, and you won't need to go to the extra trouble as I have to make a guide to positioning that particular embellishment. So all I've done is where I've cut that embellishment out of the card, I've made sure that the card was the 6 inches, which is the width here, and then I've chopped off wherever I didn't want, you know, so that the bottom of it lines up with the base of my box in effect. So I can easily put that in place, and that will enable me to apply some whatever method of adhesion I'm choosing, which in this case will be PVA glue and double-sided tape. I'll be using that combination, and then I know that when that's in place it's going to be lined up where I want it to be. So that's just a hint or tip. Now because I haven't actually already applied the double-sided tape to the back of this, I'm going to do that off camera so I'm not wasting your time, and then I'll come back to you at the point that I'm going to apply it. Right, so I've applied double-sided tape to that, and I've gone over with PVA glue, so I've just got the last little bit of backing from the double-sided tape to remove, And then I can just use this template or guide here as a basis for putting this into position. Once it's gone roughly down, I can remove that so that I'm not ending up with that being stuck in place as well. And then I can just apply some pressure and make sure that each of these areas are sticking down. Now, I do use a combination of PVA glue and double-sided tape, which you've probably heard me say plenty of times before, but for the benefit of those of you who haven't watched my videos before, it's basically because the PVA has a good strength to it, but it actually has a lot of moisture that can cause card to curl and distort, which I don't really like. So by using the double-sided tape as well, it just reduces that and adds a little bit of instant grabbing as well. It positions itself fairly immediately, so that's good. Now, the other thing I would say to anybody who's new to milk cartons, I have left off an awful lot of information that is present in the original A5 milk carton tutorial, and that's really just for the benefit of those who have watched those tutorials. I don't want to be telling them things that they're already aware of and taking up more time than necessary. So I would say that if this is the first milk carton tutorial you've looked at, it might be of benefit for you to go back and look at the original tutorial, and you might glean a few more hints and tips from that. Okay, so that's all in place and nicely positioned. So I'm just going to return to our original box for a moment, because just so that you can see that this poppy is actually on top of the embellishment we've just put in place, but is underneath this sentiment embellishment. So that's the next thing that we need to sort out. Now, for those of you who are interested, this poppy is a Poppy Stamps die cut. It's the large Iceland poppy, and it comes, if you haven't come across these die cuts before, they come in little bits and pieces. Now, you can keep these as one complete die cut, but I tend to separate mine because sometimes I just use stems on their own. And what you end up with for the flower itself, as you can see here, are a number of individual pieces, and I've just cut these out of 300 DSM watercolor card, or I think the equivalent is 140 pound weight card, and I've just, because I've been using Tim Holtz Distress inks just to color these up. Now, I haven't included this in the tutorial because this is actually only my second go with distress inks. I'm not used to colour, and so therefore I'm really not qualified to show you how to do this. So having said that, I did find on YouTube another lady who has used this particular die cutter. She's cut the pieces out of coloured card, but then she's used markers to provide some definition. So I'm not affiliated with her in any way, but I will include a link to her tutorial just in case you're a bit like me, you're not that familiar with paints and inks and you need some form of guideline for that. So that will be in the description area for you. So once that's all been glued together, you end up with a finished poppy head. So that's what we've got here, and that's going to be positioned somewhere here. Now, as you saw, that die cutter comes with the stems die cutting as well. Two stems come with it. These are the two stems, different sizes. So I've just cut those out of green cardstock. And what I'm going to need to do first is ascertain where the end of this needs to be positioned, because it is fairly critical. So we're going to look at that piece on its own first. So what I do know is that the end of that stem needs to be located behind the end of behind that little heart. So I'm going to just position that so that it's fairly evenly placed, and it only really just and so fits top to bottom, this sentiment, so I can see where that's going to be. And if I just move this around a little, just to make sure that that stem is positioned, gently remove this, and then I can put a little pencil mark around the end of that stem so I know where that end is going to be. Now I want this, the other end of the stem, to line up as though it's attached to the center of this poppy. So if I can position that roughly where I want it to go, and again move the stem where it needs to be, which I think is about there, I can do the same thing, because this is going to be, one end here where I've put this pencil mark is going to be behind the flower head, and the other end behind that heart. So I can now go ahead and apply some PVA glue to that and stick that in place, and I'm going to do that off camera, and then I'm also going to glue this in place at the same time, having, let me just find this, having worked out where I want this to be positioned. I'll also apply this other stem, which is quite straightforward, and then you look as if you've got one complete stem because the join is behind the heart. So I'm going to do that off camera because it is quite fiddly. I think you can understand what needs doing, and then I'll come back to you at that stage. Okay, so I have done a few things off camera only because they were fairly straightforward, and there's no point in you spending time just watching me gluing things on a piece of card. So I've now stuck this card down just using PVA glue. I've positioned my stem as planned so that this now looks like one continuous stem, and it's behind the heart sentiment here. I've also attached a little 3mm satin ribbon made into a bow, so it's a little bow there, which I've applied with Yoo-hoo glue rather than PVA, because I find PVA glue doesn't work quite so well with fabric. Now, before we move on to assemble the box, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the sentiment, because I didn't actually tell you anything much about that, and you might be interested in knowing that. So it's actually a creative expression sentiment, and it's from the Heart collection, Just for You. Now I can just show you that there's actually 6 dies. So you've got the main sentiment, the Just for You, but then in addition you've got these little separate dies, and I've used these with a contrast colour to stick these little hearts over the original sentiment and just have these loose ones scattered about. There's no real precise positioning for that. It's very much down to personal preference, so you know, you can make that choice. Now I have just left one there for you. It's just out of a little copper foiled card, so I've got one left to stick on, so I just thought I may as well do that one for you on camera. And they are fiddly, as you can see, they're tiny, but I just spread a little bit of PVA glue over the back there, and then I'm just going to carefully position it over that heart shape. And that will just give that a little bit of definition. So that is actually now all our embellishments finished. So we're ready to assemble the box and then sort out our closure. Right, so in assembling our box, it's the same procedure as we've applied for all the previous milk cartons. It's the side that we're going to fix first, and I've already placed some double-sided tape along the edge of that flap to save time. If you're using a different adhesive that you're more comfortable with, that's absolutely not a problem. You know, we all make our own choices in this respect. So I'm just going to, again, concern myself with the main body of the box, lining up my fold and crease lines. Then once I'm happy that they're all going to fall into place nicely, then I can remove the backing from my double-sided tape. She says, it can be quite stubborn sometimes. Let's try this end. Here I am trying to save your time. I'm spending ages trying to get the tape off. There we go. Okay, so that's looking fine. So I'm just going to line that end up. It can be a bit tricky with these longer boxes because you've got more to cope with, but I tend to try and get the joins in place and apply some pressure so that the tape takes a hold. Then you can sort out the middle section more easily and get that down. So you can see this end is loose because I'm concerned with the main body of the box, and then I can turn my attention to that end bit, which falls into place relatively easily, almost on its own. Right, so now we can concern ourselves, I hope you can just about sort that out, we concern ourselves with the bottom of the box. Now actually I probably should have said you really need to apply your adhesion prior to even putting the side of the box together. Because I'd already done that, I forgot to tell you that. So I'll quickly go over that. So whilst it's in the flat pack stage, you can apply some double-sided tape to these little end flaps. And because these end flaps are completely covered by the longer flaps, you can put as much adhesion on them as you wish, because as long as they're on the right side of the card, there'll be no stickiness inside your box, and they will help to strengthen this join. And actually I'll be using, you'll see, I will be applying some PVA glue to these as well. Now the double-sided tape on these longer flaps, whichever is your front flap, the double-sided tape goes on the wrong side or on the inside of the box, simply because it's the last flap to go down. If you make a mistake or you're not bothered which flap goes down last, then it doesn't matter, but one has to be on the inside of the box and one on the outside of the box. But keep the adhesion close to the edge in both cases, because you haven't got a huge amount of overlap to work with. So I hope that helps. So I'm going to go ahead and put some glue on these flaps so that we can get that sorted. Right. I do both ends at once because they're both going to go down at the same time. Spread that out a bit. Trying to do this so that you can see what's going on. Right, so we can get rid of that double-sided tape. Let's put that there. Just the backing. That tape is particularly helpful because actually this card is quite a thin card, and you know, if I was to cover all of that flap with PVA glue, which has that strength of adhesion, this card would have already curled quite a lot. Last one. It's being a bit stubborn. There we are. That's good. Right, so I know my back flap is coming down first. And I can just square it all up, square these ends up here, and apply some pressure from the inside, because I can do that because there's a hole there at this point. Do the same both ends. And at this point I can then remove the rest of the backing from the remaining double-sided tape. So that piece off there and this piece off the other long flap. I can then fold that over, squaring everything up in the same way. And at that point I can flip my box over, and it's good to have a long ruler to hand, something that's got length to it, just to apply some pressure to make sure, particularly not only the double-sided tape but that glue is making some contact. So there we go, that's our base sorted. So that now just leaves us with our closing mechanism. And I have been promising you over the weeks that I would show you some different methods of closing these milk cartons. So last week I shared with you this ribbon and button closure that I'd recently designed. And this week I've slightly modified that design, just so that it's still ribbon and button, but there's just 2 buttons on either side rather than the 4, and that probably makes the box easier to open and close. And those pieces of ribbon have just been weighted down with some beads. So we'll get to and start to look at how that's going together. Right, so I'm just going to move this out of the way for the moment. And the first thing I'm going to do is show you the back part of that closure, because it's the simpler part. It basically consists of a separate band which strengthens the top of the box, and I've placed some ribbon on that, and then we've got a button at either end. So that's the back part of that closure. So we'll start with one strip of card, which is the width of our box, so that's 6 inches by the 3/8 of an inch, which was that first score line measurement that we made for the top of our carton. And what I've done is I've just taken a length of ribbon that's longer than 6 inches. In this case, actually, let's have a quick look. Yes, it's 8 inches of ribbon. You don't have to embellish this closure in this way. You know, you can just put the buttons and the ribbon on one side if you want, but I'm going to show you what I've done. So this is 3mm width satin ribbon. I've put my double-sided tape on the back there because I find that it's got good adhesion and it doesn't get absorbed into the fabric of the ribbon, leaving it either hard or dark in places. But this double-sided tape is wider than the width of my ribbon, so the first thing I just need to do is fold it back on itself so that it sticks on itself, so the adhesion is retained, but it just means that it's all hidden behind the ribbon. So I'm just quickly going to do that. It does take a bit of time, but it's not too bad. There we go. So then all I need to do is hold either end, so I've got the surplus, and place that centrally across my band, so I know it's extending beyond each end of the band, and then position that. It's not an exact science. So once that's glued in place there, any excess can just turn over the end. I just use my bone folder to make sure that's getting a good adhesion. So that's now ready for our button positioning to be sorted. So all I've done there is to use a piece of cork, and you can use a template. I did actually use a template myself for the previous button closure, just to work out where they needed to be. With this closure, I do want the buttons to be slightly further in, but I can still use it as a guide. I've just flipped it over, and then if you've got a pin, knowing how far away, you can either gauge it or measure it, or I could have made a completely new template. You can just mark that card with the buttonhole positioning, and once that's sorted, you can't see the ones in the ribbon very well, but it gives you a point of which you know you need to put your cotton and needle through. So I can do the same the other end to make sure that they're evenly spaced. So that's the method I'm using, just to know that I'm getting reasonable spacing on the buttons. Again, it's not an exact science, but I wanted to just show you that. Right, so if we take a look at the front of our ribbon closure, it's a slightly different composition. The front of the box has got these tails on it. So I'm just going to show you with this second piece of card. So again, it's 6 inches wide by 3/8 of an inch in, well, 6 inches long by 3/8 of an inch wide. I've stuck these little pieces of ribbon on, again with double-sided tape. They will be joined, you know, that join will be covered with a button, but it just means that for this piece of ribbon with the tail, it would stop there. So it just means that by applying that ribbon separately, you're mimicking the front and back closures. So that's what I've done. Now, in order to work out where this ribbon wants to be, having done this, I've then taken a 20mm length piece of ribbon. I've folded it in half to find the center, and then having found that center, I know that I can place this on my grid, so I can see where the 3-inch mark is on that band, which represents my center as well. I can then take that center point for the ribbon, place that on that 3-inch mark, and I know where my adhesion then needs to start. So in addition to that, I know where it needs to finish, so I can then put a bend in the ribbon this end, and that's where I've placed my double-sided tape. So I hope that you understand that. Unfortunately, you can't just simply go ahead and place adhesion along the full length of your ribbon, because you want these ends free, which have the tying mechanism. So that's how I found out where I need to place my adhesion. Now I'm just going to go ahead and do exactly what I did with this piece. I'm going to apply this ribbon where there's the adhesion, so fold that double-sided tape over. I'm then going to use that little template to mark where my buttons need to be. I'll position my buttons and sew them in place on this piece and on this piece, and at that point I'll come back to you. Okay, so that's the front and the back sections of our closure done in this case. So they've got buttons either end, stitched on just with normal cotton, and the back the same. Now, you could apply this to your box as it is. This is where it will be positioned at the very top here. But my view is, and it is a matter of opinion, that it's going to need strengthening. You can see from this card that it's quite thin. There's not a lot of strength there. And also this card for this box is, again, quite thin, unlike the other box actually, which it has been built with thicker card. Now what can happen with milk cartons, when you start to get width across the top here, you can get a slight buckling going on in the middle. And I feel that that definitely needs strengthening, and I would rather over strengthen than under strengthen, because it's going to give your box a longer lifespan, you know, and you've gone to a lot of trouble to make it. So with that in mind, for each of these strips I've got an additional 2 strips. Now if the card was thicker, I might reduce this to just 1 strip per piece. So in total I'm using 3 strips, 6" by 3/8 of an inch, so 3 for each section, front and back. And all I've done here, actually let's just clear these front sections away, and I'm just going to demonstrate what I'm doing with the back. So I've just applied the usual double-sided tape along the center of that strip, and it doesn't really matter which way you go because the back of this is going to be stuck to the box anyway, so don't worry if you're sticking your double-sided tape this way. So I'm now going to apply some PVA glue along there as usual for that double strength. You've probably realized my habits by now. Doesn't make it right, but I like it, so. And I'll be doing this with both layers. I'll only demonstrate one because you've got better things to do than to watch me gluing things together, I'm sure. So there we go. It's quite a lot of excess glue. I'm just going to dab that face down on some towel because there's quite a lot on there, just to get rid of the excess. So there we go. And now I can take the backing off that double-sided tape. Oh, came off nice and easy for a change. And then I'll line this up and just stick the 2 layers together to form a lamination, and that will definitely strengthen that. So I'll move that one a bit out of the way for the time being and just get my bone folder and apply some pressure. You can get the nice thing about the bone folder is you can get that underneath that button. Apply that pressure all round. And then you can see where it's not adhering very well, and just keep working away at that until you're happy that you've got a good adhesion and you know it's forming one laminated piece. Around these ends tends to need a bit of work, because by the time you've got those excess bits of ribbon that have been tucked underneath and the thread from sewing on your button, there can be quite a bit of bulk there that just wants a little bit more encouragement. So I think that should give you the idea. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to stay on camera for this, it's a waste of your time. So I will do exactly the same and apply that layer then to there. And then I will do the same again for these. So I will layer these up like that. So we'll end up with 2 much stronger strips of card there. So once I've got that all in place and sorted, I'll come back to you at that stage and we can apply them to the box. Right, so that's now finished. So all 3 pieces of card have been stuck together, and I'm sure that you can see how much stronger, less bendy that is. So that being done, we can now look at attaching this to our box. So we'll deal with one at a time, and I'll just demonstrate one on camera. So this is going to be positioned here, and I'm actually going to do that simply with PVA glue. I'm not going to use any double-sided tape in this instance. Now, one hint, by the time that sits nicely on top of that fold line, you've often got a little tiny bit of the band still visible above the top of the box, and for that reason I apply the glue to the box rather than to the closing strip. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. So PVA, generous amount. You want it to stay in contact. And the nice thing is that the PVA really does stick to card well, so it should give a really nice, good adhesion. I haven't had one fall apart yet when I've used PVA, but I do find that the double-sided tape alone doesn't always hold fast. Now that could be that I'm using a lower tack adhesion, and I know that I'm not using a tape that has the maximum adhesion. There are more heavy duty double-sided tapes out there. So right, so once we've got that glue in place, we can simply position this really. It's just a case of positioning it so that the ends of the ends of the strip meet the ends or edges of the top of the box, and they're just sort of sitting on that fold line really. And it is then just a question of waiting for that glue to go off, maybe using the bone folder to help. Now I have actually done this prior to the box assembly as well, and that does work well, so either way is fine, but the choice is yours really. I do both. It depends on how I'm feeling and on the day really, so there's no right or wrong. It's often the case with crafts. It's down to instinct and what suits. So I think you can probably see how that's being positioned. I'm now going to do the same with the front section, so we'll get that on there like that, and then I'll come back to you when that's done and show you the method I then use for closing. So I will see you in a minute. Right, so that's the closure attached to the front and the back, and I've also put some little glass beads on the end of the ribbon so that it weights the ribbon down a bit, so that's better. Now I'm just going to show you, if I just nip these ends together, you can see that there's no longer any sort of buckling going on in the middle of this box, so it's really strengthened up the top edge of that box, which is what needed to happen and what it was designed to do. Now I'm sure you'll figure out for yourself how you're going to close the ends of these boxes up using the ribbon. You know, you can do a figure of 8 or what have you, but I'm just going to show you the method that I use, just so that you've got a foundation to work with. You don't need to mimic this, you know, you've got freedom of choice here. Now I actually quite like to nip the ends of the boxes together, so in order to help that, I take the ribbon from the front and take it around the end of the box first and underneath the button, the opposing button. Then I come straight over the top and down the side and underneath the button at the front. At that point I go across at the top and then around the button at the back and let the ribbon fall. Now the reason I go across is to keep this ribbon together, but also to guide the ribbon further into the box, because if I went the other way it would hang on the edge of the box, and that's not what I was looking for. You know, it doesn't really matter, there's no right or wrong, but that's why I've done that. So I'll show you again with this end because it's working the other way really. So it's really just to remember, around the end of the box and underneath the button first. You're not going round buttons at this stage at all. So you're just then going straight over the top of the box and underneath the button again. Then you're crossing over and going around the button at the back, a complete rotation. Might be a bit tight. No, it's okay. And then let the ribbon fall. All right, and so you've got that sort of effect at the back. So that's just as a guideline, you know, have a play, do what you like, and if you want to use that closure, then, you know, that's one method. You don't have to use that closing mechanism. You can use some other method if you wanted. There are options out there. All right, so that's basically the tall triple width milk carton. So it's actually the taller version of the milk carton that I showed you last week. Now there are still some more variations on this A5 milk carton to come moving forward. So if you're interested in seeing those tutorials, do please subscribe to my GryphonArt channel, and then you'll get notified of when they are published. If you're interested in any of the A5 milk carton variations, there is a document available for download from my website at GryphonArt.co.uk, and I will put a link in the description area for this video so that you've got easier access to that. So I think that's everything that I need to tell you for the purposes of this tutorial. So thank you very much for your time.